Asante Sana, Director of Ceremonies. It's a pleasure to join you. Habari za asubuhi. Asante. So if you allow me, I take off my face mask because this is also about free speech, you know, unhindered. The Director of Public Prosecution of the Republic of Kenya, Mr. Nordin Haji, the Chairperson of the Media Council of Kenya, Mr. Maina Muiruri, the Chief Executive Officer of the Media Council of Kenya, Mr. David Umwoyo, invited guests from all over the Eastern Africa region, including from Rwanda, Uganda, Ethiopia, Comoros, Madagascar, Somalia, Djibouti, South Sudan, and of course from here in Kenya as well. Ladies and gentlemen, dear participants, a very good morning. Today we are joining the international community in commemorating a very important day, a day during which we put a spotlight on the increasing dangers that journalists worldwide face in the course of doing their work. The theme of this year, which is countering threats of violence and crimes against journalists to protect freedom of expression for all, this theme could not be more appropriate. It echoes, in fact, the Norwegian Nobel Committee when it decided to award the Nobel Prize for this year, 2021, to Maria Ressa and Dmitry Muratov. And it did this for, and let me quote directly from the report from the jury of the Nobel Peace Prize. It says, for their courageous fight for freedom of expression. They are representatives of all journalists who stand up for this ideal in a world in which democracy and freedom of the press face increasingly adverse conditions. End of quote from the jury report. Now, this is also the first time that this prestigious prize is awarded to journalists, and that in 86 years. It was high time. The UNESCO Observatory of Killed Journalists and also the UNESCO Director General's report on the safety of journalists and the danger of impunity are clear. Journalists are increasingly subjected to various forms of threats, such as kidnappings, torture, arbitrary arrests, intimidation, harassment, and attacks, particularly in the digital space. And female journalists are unfortunately particularly impacted, as revealed in these reports. In the most extreme cases, journalists have paid the ultimate price, which is their life. Imagine, killed just because they happen to be journalists doing their work. UNESCO is extremely worried by the increasing trend of extrajudicial targeting of journalists. Sadly, most of such crimes go unpunished. Out of 10 journalists killed, only one gets a judicial closure, according to UNESCO's global monitoring reports. Now, such high levels of impunity have a chilling effect on our democracy. As the UN Plan of Action on the Safety of Journalists states, the curtailment of journalistic expression deprives society as a whole of their journalistic contribution and results in a wider impact on press freedom, where a climate of intimidation and violence leads to self-censorship. The award of the Nobel Peace Prize to journalists reflects a growing international recognition of the need to protect journalists against unwarranted attacks. Similarly, in January this year, UNESCO, together with other international partners, launched the very first digital platform dedicated to the safety of journalists. The platform seeks to develop early warning mechanisms, improve the protection of journalists, address threats and violence against them, and enhance response capacity within the continent. It was highly welcomed by the President of South Africa, His Excellency Ramaphosa, as well as the President of Burkina Faso, His Excellency Kabore, who both pledged their full support to this initiative. In March this year, 2021, the UN Congress on Crime Prevention and Criminal Justice passed a declaration that recognized the specificity of threats faced by journalists. And it further called for renewed global cooperation to end impunity for crimes committed against them. Then, in May this year, the United Nations General Assembly Special Session on Corruption adopted a declaration in which signatory member states committed to, and I quote from the document, provide a safe and adequate environment to journalists and to investigate, prosecute, and punish threats and acts of violence committed against them. End of quote. Dear participants, it is important to recognize the strong link with the right of access to information, which in turn shall improve the standards of freedom of expression and strengthen capacities for ending impunity and impunity of crimes against journalists. This is particularly important in Africa, I would say, in this continent, where so far only 26 out of the 54 countries have access to information laws. So that's less than half. This is why UNESCO will continue developing resources such as, for instance, the guidelines for prosecutors on cases of crimes against journalists, which was published in the year 2020, so just last year, and which is now also available online in Kiswahili and in Somali. Now this, together with the newly published UNESCO Global Toolkit for Judicial Actors entitled International Legal Standards on Freedom of Expression, Access to Information and Safety of Journalists. Now this guideline, this toolkit, will be used in the upcoming training for judiciary training institutes in Africa. And this training will be organized by UNESCO in Addis Ababa from 27th November till 3rd of December this year. So just later this month. Ladies and gentlemen, as we celebrate this day, let us intensify joint action in defending media freedom and ensuring the safety of journalists. This is part of defending our democracies. And in closing, I go back to where I started by, let me quote, in this case, the Director General of UNESCO, Ms. Audrey Azoulay, when recognizing the importance of the awarding of the Nobel Peace Prize to journalists. Start of quote. In awarding this prize, the Nobel Committee has powerfully stated their conviction that freedom of expression and access to information are the very foundations of democracy and peace. These ideals fully echo UNESCO's mandate. Journalists are on the front lines of the struggle to shine light into the most needed places, often facing tremendous personal risk to do so.